This is lecture video 1 for SED 582, and we're going to be focusing on creating a Tier 2 system of support within your schools for PBIS. So some big ideas with a Tier 2 system is to create effective and efficient systems. I especially think of data collection when I'm looking at this. You want to have a streamlined method for data collection, but it's especially important to keep in mind that it also influences relationships with teachers. So when you're asking a teacher to collect data, you're asking them to do another thing for, a group of 20 students. So it's really important to keep that in mind of how you're going to effectively collect data and utilize it. Efficient, so you want to look at efficient systems for whether it be classrooms, individual, or school-wide. And keep in mind that some data is already available on systems such as PowerSchool, attendance information, etc. So multi-level Tier 2, we're going to be doing a lot of focusing on interventions such as check-in, check-out, behavior education programs, targeted groups. We're going to learn more about doing simple FBAs, modifying check-in, check-out, and just keeping in mind that any Tier 2 intervention is not a completely individualized program. We can modify them slightly, but there's no comprehensive assessments involved in Tier 2, and so it allows us to be able to think functionally but not get as in-depth as we would for a Tier 3. And we're going to get more on that later on in class as well. So you're probably going to be seeing this kind of conceptual model quite frequently when involved in PBIS. And this just kind of outlines, systems plus data plus practices equals outcomes. And we usually start over here with data. Whoa, didn't know where that came from. We start with data. So we're looking at, identifying problems. Where, when, who, what are the problems existing in our school? And this data usually already exists. I mean, after some data collection and you notice that there's a lot of incidences in the bathroom or the hallway, then you move on to practices. What practices can we use to intervene? And the systems allow us to, build a leadership team to think about the professional development, evaluation, training, and implementation. Acronym alert. So we've got quite a few acronyms. When you're looking at PBIS, PBIS in itself is an acronym that's used quite frequently. So we've got check-in, check-out, behavior education program, BEP, check-in, check-out in its umbrella term. So there's different systems. We've got BEP, which is a type of check-in, check-out, social academic instructional groups, and FBA, which is functional behavior assessment. That's mostly the Tier 2. So we've got universal team, which is Tier 1. Then we move on to secondary systems team, problem solving team. So this is the middle, which is Tier 2. So then we can go down to interventions such as check-in, check-out, social academic instructional groups, group with individual features, brief FBAs, and then we're moving on to problem solving. Okay, so this is for one student at a time. You're doing some problem solving and it's all connected. So it's also important for us to see that the growth in green equals a reduction in the red. So the more you beef up your universal supports, the less you're going to see any need for Tier 3 in your school. And you may try something for 2 or 3 weeks to intervene to see what works. You may need a more functional match. That's why you do the brief FBAs and behavior intervention plans. I like to think of, the public health model when we're looking at PBIS. Um, so you go to the doctor for just a checkup, do some preventative work, take your vitamins, etc. Sometimes you may have a cold or, the flu or some rash. Okay, so then you go in for, some more individualized supports, that are pretty cookie cutter. Okay, so doctor says, well, let's try this. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't work, we maybe need to go for more tests. So that would be your tier 3. So that's just a way to kind of think about PBIS and the multi-tiered systems of supports. So some examples of tier 2 interventions, we've got check and check out, self-monitoring, social skills instruction groups. I see a lot of lunch bunches going on. I know that I do that a lot in my school because it's a great time to be able to connect with students, and regular ed teachers love it because it doesn't take away from their regular education instruction. Goal setting with students, problem solving, which is also debriefing, daily behavior report cards. That can also go under check in, check out, behavioral contracting, mentoring, etc. So we're going to talk about a lot of these within the class. So we're going to talk about tier 2 teams. So it's important to have within that team expertise in both academic assessment and intervention. And so why would you think that you would need someone with expertise in academic assessment and intervention? Well, because a lot of times students that struggle academically are trying to, escape that by way of displaying behaviors, and that we would call an escape maintain behavior. We also need faculty with expertise in behavioral assessments and interventions. School administrator, more so to support the implementation and help with that system, and maintain access to district level support. So that's allowing us to align resources, staffing, structure to support PBIS, and that's very important. Also having staff that are aware of, sometimes it's not so much a matter of achievement for students who display behaviors, but also executive functioning. So you could have students that are very, very high functioning, but lack the organizational or self-starting skills to be able to be successful, and then you see behaviors manifest from that. So problem-solving team. It's important to have a process leader. So that could be classroom teachers or specialist teachers. It's recommended by PBIS to rotate quarterly, and this allows your team to consider sustainability. So if someone is out sick for a long term or gets a new job, you're still able to build that sustainability and allow that team to continue their work without having to rely on one sole person. So it's important to rotate the process leader. It's also important to consider having school psychologists, counselors, administrators on that team. And then also the process, data-based decision-making, guiding questions, function-based interventions, focus on teaching replacement. So that's to increase pro-social behaviors. We can talk about that more later also. Environmental operations and supports, looking at the environment, the classroom, maybe the classroom management practices, and also to monitor progress. How are we going to monitor progress? So some of these things are really important to consider when developing your team within your school. So some basic steps. We've got the school-wide, including classroom management, universal practices in place. So tier 1. It's really important to have tier 1 systems set up because that sets up the infrastructure for tier 2. Also, identifying needs of students who require additional support. But we're also going back to the tier 1 where we're looking at what's happening within the classroom. Are the classroom management practices allowing the student to get the most out of their education? Okay, identifying what supports the student may need, whether that's environmental or specific interventions, and then you're also monitoring and evaluating progress. So that's a process where we're looking at data and what works in that context. Okay, so here's some tier 2 supports. They're centralized. Each has a coordinator. So for example, a check-in, check-out intervention would have a coordinator, a go-to person that would kind of facilitate the implementation. So it would take the tier 2 team to place students in the support. Classroom supports are continued and modified. So those tier 1 interventions, they're still going on while the student is receiving tier 2 supports, and that's very important to consider. All the people in the building are aware of their role in supporting the students in tier 2 supports. We're going to look at some top 10 essential classroom practices. This PowerPoint you'll be able to print out and look back at your leisure. So expectations and rules, define procedures and routines, those are all tier 1. Active teaching of expectations, rules, procedures, and routines. A continuum of strategies to acknowledge these procedures and routines. And a continuum of strategies to correct when students are not able to learn these expectations the first time. It also requires active supervision, frequent opportunities to respond, sequencing of activities, academic success and task difficulty is something to consider, and the ratio of positive to negative interactions. So we use the 5-to-1 rule. 5 positive interactions to 1 negative interaction. So 5 compliments to 1 correction, or 5 positive interactions to 1 correction. And a lot of times teachers don't even realize what their ratio is until they actually, you could take a couple pieces of paper, wrap them around your wrist, and do a tally every time you're having to correct a student or every time that you're giving positive praise. And that just kind of puts things in perspective on what's happening in your tier 2 support process. So step 1, the identification process. So you're going to have some decision rules, a referral process, and a screening for behavior. And we're going to look at that more within this course as well. This is just an outline. Grade level team problem solving. So we're going to be looking at classroom supports and progress monitoring. And then we're going to look at tier 2 interventions. So these non-responders to classroom supports, those tier 1 supports, we're going to match the function of student behavior to the intervention. So we may need to do a brief FBA. And then you're going to progress monitor and then evaluate your process. So within the tier 2 team, you're initially, your primary role will be to build the process and assist with team problem solving. Once the team problem solving is in operation, the lead role will be able to review referrals and place students in appropriate tier 2 interventions, serve as coordinators of tier 2 interventions, allow for monitoring student progress and overall process. So some lessons learned just from years of doing PBIS is teachers need to consistently implement classroom universal interventions. So the tier 1 always needs to be going on for effective tier 2 implementation. Problem-solving teams may need training on team process and how to collect, analyze, and make data decisions. It's important to protect meeting times, use an agenda, and keep minutes. Build in time for professional development. And I would recommend during the school day. New teachers may have no background knowledge regarding this process, so it may be important to look at having a PBIS handbook or outlining those policies and protocols for new teachers coming in. It's hard to stick to tier 2 data rules and not jump to tier 3. So it's important to look at giving, a boxed intervention before you look at giving a less restrictive, individualized intervention, because that would make it a tier 3 intervention. And then teachers often see support as outside the classroom, where they can be implementing a lot of these tier 2 interventions themselves within the classroom. Communication, communication, communication between parents, all stakeholders involved with the student. Also, tier 2 does not imply that the student's behavior is someone else's problem. This is a big one. A lot of times, a facilitator for a check-in, check-out may also be a special education teacher. And oftentimes when people get in the mindset of, okay, well, this is the go-to person for so-and-so's behavior, then that doesn't make it a team effort. And that's something we need to always keep in mind with these interventions, is it's still a team effort, regardless of who the go-to person is.